In this video I'll be examining the effects of compensation water on River Trent and River Derwent Barbel. I'm sure you've all experienced this. Sometimes when we go fishing the conditions look perfect and we expect to do really well. In fact, we end up catching nothing or very little. This can sometimes be due to factors beyond our control, like for example cold deoxygenated compensation water coming out of Ladybower Reservoir and flowing down the River Derwent and then the River Trent. We can limit these occasions if we can predict when compensation water is likely to be coming out, and later on I'm going to show you how to do this. I will also show you which river level gauges to check on the gov.uk website, and I will also show you how to work out how long it would take for the compensation water to get down to the areas that you're fishing. I'll be looking at one trip where compensation water is coming down and one trip where compensation water is not coming down. To check to see if compensation water is coming down, firstly we type river levels into Google. We then choose the gov.uk Flood Warning Information Service. You can then search for the area that you want to check, and we will type in Yorkshire Bridge. Yorkshire Bridge is on the River Derwent below the southern end of Ladybower Reservoir. Ladybower Reservoir is the southernmost in the chain of reservoirs in the Derwent Valley. These reservoirs are very deep and contain an enormous volume of water. They're surrounded by woodlands, and the trees of which lose their leaves in the autumn, and these end up decomposing at the bottom of the reservoir. When the compensation water is let out of Ladybower Reservoir, it works its way down the River Derwent and down the Trent. So it takes quite a while for it to do this, as the average speed for rivers is between 1 and 3 metres per second. By volume, the River Derwent is probably the River Trent's largest tributary, so a sudden surge of compensation water from Ladybower Reservoir can affect the oxygen levels and the water temperature on not just the River Derwent but the River Trent below Shardlow as well. Now we click on Yorkshire Bridge to see the river level. Normally it's a relatively flat graph like the one shown here. It's shown over a period of 5 days, and I took this screen snip a few days before making this video. If there was a sudden surge of compensation water, it would look something like this on the graph. It goes up vertically because it's the opening of a valve, and it goes down vertically as well because it's the shutting of the valve. Later on in this video there'll be more technical details about this and how to calculate the speeds of the water. The effects of compensation water on River Derwent Barbel is greater than that on the River Trent Barbel due to the river being a lot smaller, and therefore the concentration of the cold deoxygenated water is higher. I've had good and bad trips to the River Derwent, some of which were unexplained failures but could have been due to lack of barbel in the stretch, or alternatively could have been due to compensation water. This is my biggest barbel from the River Derwent, 15 pounds 10 ounces, caught a few years ago on a lump of luncheon meat. These two photos of my barbel were taken by my dad Patric Kyte, who at the time of making this video was 85 years old. I took this screen print of the water level at Yorkshire Bridge on my return from the trip to the Trent that you're just about to see. When I arrived the conditions looked ideal. The water was up a little bit and the air temperature was reasonably warm for this time of year. I started off with a little extra weight on my feeder and a gentle underarm lob to cast it into position. I baited up quite lightly for a start with about 8 bait size free offerings. I sat back and held the line waiting for a bite. It wasn't long before I was into a fish. Even though it wasn't my target species, I was pleased and I thought perhaps a barbel would be along soon. After I caught the fish, I baited up again. I kept fishing for the rest of the day, fishing quite hard. I did have another knock, but didn't catch any more. I thought something was wrong. I would have expected to do better than this, and this prompted me to check the river level gauges for Yorkshire Bridge upon my return. In hindsight, if I realised the compensation water was coming down, I either wouldn't have gone or I would have baited up a lot less while I was there. When I checked the river levels, I found that compensation water had been released the previous day. I've also shown my fishing trip in red on this graph. And now for a trip without compensation water coming down. This was a couple of weeks prior to the trip that I've just shown you. The water wasn't quite as high as the trip that I've just shown you, so I was baiting up a bit further out, just on the edge of the main current. As bait, I was trying two 15mm fishy boilies. I didn't catch anything on my first couple of casts, but I kept persevering. Eventually I had a bite and was into a fish. I had to put side strain on it to try and keep it out of those tree branches and to try and get it moving upstream. A really good start, a nicely conditioned barbel. I again baited up after catching a fish. This time I used my catapult. I was trying to get the free offerings on the edge of the main current, and then I sat back and waited. This one felt a much better fish. It was powerful and moving off strongly downstream. I'm again putting on side strain and trying to get it to move upstream. Eventually the barbel started moving out and upstream. I made sure the unhooking mat was nice and wet as it had dried out a bit in the sun. What a cracking fish, no wonder it fought so hard. Look at that perfect and powerful tail. If you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe. I continued fishing as the sun went down, but didn't get any more until it got dark. After dark I had a fantastic fight and caught my biggest barbel of the trip, shown here in the top right. I carried on fishing and got another one a bit smaller. So this was a day in which compensation water was not coming down, as I checked the gauge when I got home, and it meant that I could put in as much bait as I liked really, and the barbel kept feeding and I could keep working them up into the swim. We will now look in more detail at the mechanism how I think it is for letting the compensation water out at Ladybower Reservoir. I am now going to sketch a section through the dam at Ladybower Reservoir, showing the dam wall and the slope behind it leading down to the River Derwent at the bottom. This is the bed of the reservoir and a schematic section of the pipe that links the bottom of the reservoir to the River Derwent at the other end. This is the water pressure building up behind the valve on the pipe, and also the normal level of the River Derwent. When the valve is open, the water gushes out, representing the vertical slope on the graph of the river level sections, as the River Derwent level suddenly rises. When the valve is replaced, the Derwent water level suddenly drops. So in conclusion, especially in winter, make sure you check the Yorkshire Bridge river level before you go fishing. If compensation water is coming out, make sure you feed lightly, or maybe even think about not going. Remember that you also need to calculate the time it will take to get down to the area that you're fishing. If you're fishing the Derwent around Derby, probably half a day would be the amount of time that it would take to get down, as the water travels between 1 and 3 metres per second. The cold compensation water coming out will be next to the riverbed and will be slowed down a little bit because of the friction with the riverbed, and also it will eddy around a bit. The riverbed also has a specific heat capacity, and this means that it will warm up and cool down slowly, which means that there will be a delaying effect of the compensation water, so allow a little bit more time. In the summer I expect the effect from the compensation water to be a lot less, or maybe even improve the fishing. But let's monitor this and let me know in the comments if this affects your fishing. If you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe.